You're nothing without this, and now you're truly dead. That's what my granddaughter spat at me as she threw my will into the fire. Her voice was ice cold, sharp enough to cut through any love I thought still existed between us. I can still hear those words echoing in my mind, each syllable dripping with hatred so pure it made my blood freeze. She stood there, watching the ashes rise like it was my funeral, whispering that she had destroyed my last wish. The flames danced in her eyes, and for a moment, I swear I saw the devil himself looking back at me through her face. She thought I was gone. She thought she'd won. But what she didn't know is that I had already made a video version of that will, one that would speak louder than her lies. Before I tell you how that moment broke my heart and how justice burned brighter than her greed, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to Revenge Stories Journal, and comment below where you're watching from. Because what you're about to hear proves that the dead may rest, but the truth never does. You want to know how deep betrayal can cut? Let me tell you about the girl I raised from nothing, who turned around and tried to erase my very existence from this world. I was 28 when my husband died in that factory accident. 28 years old, holding a 3-year-old daughter, and wondering how I was going to survive in a world that didn't give a damn about widowed mothers. I worked 3 jobs just to keep food on our table. My hands bled from cleaning offices at night, my back ached from waitressing during the day, and my soul died a little more each time I had to leave my baby girl with strangers. But I survived. We survived. I gave my daughter everything I could, every ounce of love in my broken heart, every dollar I scraped together. And when she grew up and had her own daughter, my granddaughter Sarah, I thought I'd been blessed with a second chance at motherhood. Then my daughter died in that car crash when Sarah was only 7. 7 years old, just like I had been when my own mother abandoned me. But I swore on my daughter's grave that this little girl would never know the pain of being unwanted. I took Sarah in without hesitation, without complaint, without a single regret. I raised her to value kindness. She learned only inheritance. For 15 years, I poured my life into that child. I worked extra shifts to pay for her piano lessons, her art classes, her college tuition. I went without new clothes so she could have the latest fashions. I ate beans and rice for dinner so she could have steak. Every Christmas morning, her face lighting up at the mountain of presents under our tree, that was worth every sacrifice I made. But somewhere along the way, love turned into expectation. Gratitude became entitlement. The sweet little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms grew into a woman who only called when she needed money. When she married that banker's son, everything changed. Suddenly, my modest house wasn't good enough for her visits. My homemade meals weren't sophisticated enough for her palate. I became an embarrassment to her new life, a reminder of the poverty she was desperate to escape. She'd visit maybe twice a year, always with her hand out. "Grandma, we need help with the down payment." "Grandma, can you loan us money for the wedding?" "Grandma, our car broke down." Never, "How are you feeling?" Never, "I miss you." Always money. Always taking. I should have seen the greed growing, but when love blinds you, deceit walks in smiling. The last time she visited before I got sick, she spent the entire dinner talking about inheritance taxes and estate planning. She kept asking about my will, about my assets, about what would happen to the house. I thought she was just being practical, maybe even caring about my future. How naive I was. That's when I decided to update my will. Not because I was planning to die, but because I wanted to make sure my legacy lived on properly. Every line in that will was written in love, a map of everything I wanted her to continue. The scholarship fund for underprivileged children in my daughter's name. The donations to the animal shelter where I volunteered. The money set aside for the church that had been my sanctuary during the darkest times. But I also left her the house, my savings, my mother's jewelry. Everything that mattered to me, I was ready to place in her hands because I believed, God help me, I still believed, that somewhere inside that cold woman was the little girl I had raised. My lawyer, Mr. Dalton, was the one who suggested making a video will alongside the written one. He'd been handling my affairs for over 20 years, watched me struggle and scrimp and save. He knew how hard I'd worked for everything I had. "Ma'am," he said, his weathered hands folding over his desk, "I've seen too many families torn apart by greed. Paper burns. But truth recorded can't be erased. Let's make sure your voice is heard, no matter what happens." I thought he was being overly cautious. I never imagined my own granddaughter would be the threat he was protecting me from. The heart attack came without warning. One minute I was tending my garden, the next I was waking up in a hospital bed with tubes down my throat and machines beeping around me like a symphony of death. For 3 weeks, I lay there between life and whatever comes after, fighting to breathe, fighting to survive. Sarah visited once. She stood at the foot of my bed for maybe 10 minutes, her eyes not on my face, but scanning the medical equipment like she was calculating my chances. She didn't hold my hand. She didn't say she loved me. She just asked the nurses about my prognosis and left. While I was fighting for my life, she was moving into my house. To take care of things, she told everyone. To make sure Grandma has a home to come back to. The lies came so easily to her now. But I did come back. Against all odds, against the doctor's expectations, against Sarah's obvious hopes, I survived. The day they discharged me, I was weak but determined. I had Mr. Dalton drive me home because Sarah was mysteriously unavailable. The moment I walked through my front door, I knew something was wrong. The house felt different, violated. My personal papers were scattered, my desk drawers hung open, and there was a smell in the air, the acrid scent of something burned. That's when I saw the fireplace. My beautiful stone fireplace that I had saved for years to build, now filled with gray ash and the charred remains of what had once been important papers. And there, placed deliberately on the mantel where I couldn't miss it, was a note in Sarah's handwriting. "Rest well, Grandma. I made sure your final wish never sees daylight." My knees gave out. I collapsed right there on my living room floor, staring at the ashes of what I thought was my destroyed will. She didn't just burn my will. She burned my faith in blood. She burned my belief that family meant something. She burned the last piece of innocence in my old heart. But you know what didn't burn? My rage. My fury blazed hotter than any fire she could have lit. In that moment, sprawled on my own floor, I felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap. Like a bone setting wrong, healing crooked, creating something harder and sharper than what came before. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't call her to confront her. Instead, I crawled to my phone and called Mr. Dalton. My voice was steady as stone when I told him what had happened. "She burned it, Harold. She burned my will and left me a note about it." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he sighed, a sound that carried 40 years of legal experience and human disappointment. "Then it's time, Evelyn. It's time." For the next week, I said nothing. I played the part of the defeated old woman perfectly. When Sarah called to check if I had settled back in okay, I told her I was tired, confused, maybe a little forgetful about recent events. I let her believe I didn't remember coming home to ashes and accusations. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence was my weapon. During those quiet days, while Sarah was probably celebrating her victory, Mr. Dalton was busy. He was reviewing the video will, preparing the necessary legal documents, scheduling the formal reading. He was building a trap so perfect that even he seemed impressed by its elegance. Sarah, meanwhile, was living her best life. I heard through mutual friends that she was bragging at her country club, telling people she had taken care of everything and that Grandma's done interfering. She was already shopping for funeral clothes, already planning how to redecorate my house. The arrogance was breathtaking. The cruelty was beyond anything I had imagined possible from someone I had loved so completely. But her celebration was about to end. The day of the will reading arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I watched from my bedroom window as family members arrived at Mr. Dalton's office, distant cousins I barely spoke to, church friends who had been kind to me over the years, and Sarah. Sarah walked into that building like she owned it. She was dressed in black from head to toe, playing the part of the grieving granddaughter to perfection. I could see her practicing her sad face in the reflection of the office windows. The performance was almost convincing. If only they knew I was watching from across the street, very much alive and ready to destroy her little charade. Inside that conference room, Mr. Dalton told me this part later. Everyone was seated around his massive mahogany table. Sarah had positioned herself at the head, naturally, like she was already the matriarch of our family. The others looked uncomfortable, uncertain why they had been called to a will reading when I was supposedly still alive. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat and looked around the room with the gravity of a judge pronouncing sentence. Ladies and gentlemen, since Mrs. Evelyn Monroe is unable to attend today's reading, we'll begin with her video testimony. Sarah's face lit up with what she thought was grief, but looked more like triumph. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Poor Grandma. I'm just glad she's at peace now." The lies came so easily to her. Too easily. Mr. Dalton wheeled in the television and slipped in the DVD. The screen flickered to life, and there I was, very much alive, very much coherent, sitting in his office just 2 weeks prior. The color drained from Sarah's face so fast I thought she might faint. My recorded voice filled the room, strong and clear. If this message is being played, it means someone has tried to destroy my final will and testament. But the truth, my dear family, doesn't burn as easily as paper. I watched through the window as Sarah's perfectly composed mask cracked like old paint. Her mouth fell open, her hands started shaking, and she gripped the edge of the table like she was about to fall through the floor. On screen, I continued, "I want to thank each of you for the love and kindness you've shown me throughout my life. Mrs. Patterson, your casseroles kept me fed when I was too proud to ask for help. Cousin Michael, your visits meant more than you know. Father Rodriguez, your prayers carried me through the darkest times." I paused in the recording, my eyes looking directly into the camera, directly at the person I knew would need to hear this most. And to the one who thought fire could erase my wishes, I hope this flame reminds you of everything you've lost. Mr. Dalton paused the video. The silence in that room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could see Sarah's shoulders shaking, could see her fumbling for her phone like she was going to call someone, anyone, to explain what was happening. That's when she whispered, her voice barely audible, "She's alive." Mr. Dalton smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years, and walked to the conference room door. "Would you like to ask her yourself?" And then I entered. I had chosen my outfit carefully for this moment. A dark red dress that my husband had bought me for our anniversary 40 years ago. My mother's pearl necklace. My hair done exactly the way Sarah used to tell me looked too fancy for an old woman. I wanted to look like everything she had tried to erase, everything she thought she had burned to ash. The gasps echoed through the room like a choir of disbelief. Cousin Michael actually crossed himself. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her heart. But my eyes were only on Sarah. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. Her face went from white to green, her breathing became shallow and rapid, and I swear I could hear her heart hammering from across the room. Good. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the terror I had felt when I found those ashes. I walked slowly to the front of the room, my cane clicking against the hardwood floor with each deliberate step. On the conference table sat a single white candle that Mr. Dalton had lit before I entered, a nice theatrical touch. I placed my hand near the flame, feeling its warmth, and looked straight into Sarah's terrified eyes. "You burned my will," I said, my voice carrying across the room like a judge pronouncing sentence. But not my truth. That's when Sarah completely broke down. The composed, calculating woman dissolved into a sobbing, shaking mess. She fell to her knees beside her chair, reaching toward me with trembling hands. "Grandma, please, I can explain. I thought you were dying. I thought you wouldn't need it anymore. I was just trying to protect the family assets from taxes. Please, you have to understand." The lies kept pouring out of her mouth like water from a broken dam. Each word made me angrier. Each excuse made my heart harder. This wasn't the confused desperation of someone who had made a mistake. This was the calculated panic of someone who had been caught. I turned to Mr. Dalton without acknowledging her pleas. "Proceed with the reading of my actual will." What happened next was beautiful in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. Mr. Dalton read aloud every detail of my real last will and testament, the one that Sarah's fire couldn't touch, the one that had been safely locked in his office vault for months. The house? Donated to Habitat for Humanity, to be given to a deserving family in need. My savings? Split between the Children's Hospital where I had volunteered and a scholarship fund in my daughter's name for students who had lost parents young. My mother's jewelry? Given to Mrs. Patterson, who had been more family to me in the last 5 years than my own blood. My car? Donated to the church to help elderly parishioners get to medical appointments. Sarah's name? Completely absent. Erased. Like she had tried to erase me. When Mr. Dalton finished reading, he set down the papers and looked directly at Sarah, who was still on the floor, now completely silent with shock. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "tampering with inheritance documents is a federal offense. The court will be contacting you regarding criminal charges for destruction of legal property and attempted fraud." That's when Sarah's shock turned to rage. She scrambled to her feet, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared with tears, and pointed at me like I was the villain in this story. "You vindictive old witch. You planned this. You set me up. That money is mine. I took care of you. I sacrificed for you." The lies were so absurd they were almost funny. Almost. "You worked your whole life for me," she screamed. "Everything you have should come to me. I'm your family. I'm your blood." I let her rage wash over me like rain off a roof. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke quietly, my words cutting through her hysteria like a blade through silk. "You are not my family. Family doesn't watch their grandmother's will burn and smile. Family doesn't steal from the dead. Family doesn't mistake kindness for weakness." I paused, letting that sink in. "You want to know what you inherited from me, Sarah? You inherited exactly what you gave me in return for 22 years of love, nothing." She stormed out of that office like a hurricane, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Through the glass, I watched her stumble toward her car, sobbing and screaming into her phone. Probably calling her husband, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster into something she could survive. But I wasn't done with her yet. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence for several minutes after she left. Mrs. Patterson was the first to speak, her voice soft with something that might have been awe. "Evelyn, how did you know she would try to destroy your will?" I sat down in Sarah's abandoned chair and folded my hands in my lap. The truth was, I hadn't known. I had hoped, right up until the moment I saw those ashes, that the little girl I raised was still somewhere inside the woman she had become. "I didn't know," I said, "but I prepared for the possibility. Mr. Dalton warned me that greed makes people do terrible things. I just never thought my own granddaughter would prove him right. I didn't need revenge. Truth handled that for me." The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. Apparently, my stories struck a nerve with people who had been betrayed by their own families. The local news picked it up, then the national outlets. I became the poster grandmother for standing up to entitled children. Sarah tried to contest the will, of course. She hired expensive lawyers and claimed I was mentally incompetent, that I had been manipulated, that the video will was somehow fraudulent. But Mr. Dalton had been thorough. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed. The court proceedings were a formality. During the trial, they played the video of me explaining my decision to disinherit her. I had made that recording the day after I discovered the burned will, when the pain was still fresh and my anger was pure. Sarah Monroe is no longer my granddaughter, my recorded voice told the courtroom. She stopped being my family the moment she chose greed over love. I raised her to be better than this. I failed. But I won't compound that failure by rewarding her cruelty with my life's work. The judge ruled in favor of my will within an hour of deliberation. Sarah's lawyers advised her to accept the decision and avoid further criminal charges. She took their advice, but not gracefully. The last I heard, she and her husband had divorced. Apparently, marrying someone for their expected inheritance becomes less attractive when that inheritance disappears. She lost the house they couldn't afford without my money, lost most of her friends when the story went public, lost the lifestyle she thought she was entitled to. Some people might think I went too far. Some might say I was cruel to completely cut her off, that family should forgive family no matter what. To those people, I say this. Forgiveness is not the same as enabling. Love is not the same as being a doormat. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. In the end, I didn't lose a granddaughter. I simply discovered who she truly was. The ashes of that will didn't destroy me, they freed me. Because when people show you their greed, believe them. When they show you that your love means nothing compared to your money, believe them. When they show you that they see you as an obstacle rather than a person, believe them. I spent my whole life making excuses for people who didn't deserve them, giving second chances to people who wasted their first ones, loving people who saw that love as weakness. Sarah's betrayal was the final lesson I needed to learn. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who know exactly how much they mean to you. I lived for 3 more years after that while reading. 3 peaceful, unburdened years in a small apartment near the church, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I had. I watched the scholarship recipients graduate, saw the families who moved into houses built by Habitat for Humanity, visited the children's hospital, and saw the equipment my donations had purchased. My legacy lived on exactly as I had planned, not in the hands of someone who would have squandered it, but in the lives of people who needed it and appreciated it. Sarah never tried to contact me again. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she struggled for a while, had to get a real job for the first time in her adult life, had to learn what it meant to work for what you have. Maybe that was the education I should have given her 20 years earlier. Did I feel guilty? Sometimes. Did I wonder if I had been too harsh? Occasionally. But then I would remember her face in the fireplace light, watching my will burn, and I knew I had made the right choice. The truth doesn't burn, and neither does justice. Sometimes they take longer to arrive than we'd like, but they always show up eventually. And when they do, they burn brighter and hotter than any fire greed can light. If you've ever been betrayed by someone who mistook your kindness for weakness, remember this story. Remember that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Remember that saying no to someone who only sees you as a source of money isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. And remember that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes silence is strength. Sometimes silence is the pause before justice speaks so loudly that the whole world can hear it. Like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear that the dead may rest, but the truth never does.